Before we get into today's episode, and trust me, there is a lot to get into, I want to talk to you about your skin, which I know is a weird thing to come from this podcast, but you're stressed. You're reading the news, you're probably not sleeping great, and your skin knows it. I know mine does. Facial in a Bottle by Love Indus is a single product that does the work of a full professional facial at home in minutes. Clean ingredients, real results, no appointment required. Go to loveindus.com and use code MIMS25 for 21% off your first order. All right, let's get on with the show. It's Friday, March 13th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. Today on the show, I've got Liz Dye from the Law and Chaos Pod back on the show. She is one of my go-tos for all things legal, and we really hit the ground running here. We say hello and then we are off to the races, talking about what the Department of Justice has been doing lately when it comes to trying to provide cover for their own lawyers who keep screwing up case after case after case and pissing off a lot of judges. Attorney General Pam Bondi has recently made it her mission to try and get around ethics rules in pretty much every state in the country after one of the big-name lawyers in the DOJ, a guy named Ed Martin, who you'll hear Liz talk about a lot in just a minute, did some pretty crazy things after a complaint was filed against him. Well, now the Department of Justice, under Pam Bondi, wants to try to skirt those ethics rules to help save Ed, but also quite a few other people. We also talk a little bit about what that means looking at immigration, what it means ahead for the election, for things that I talked about in yesterday's episode, and what it might mean looking forward if the Department of Defense tries to put more military lawyers in federal courts where they don't belong. It's this mismatch of lawyers and the court and what happens next and what it means for the idea of how lawyers do their jobs in different states, and it could change how the federal government approaches federal courts in these different jurisdictions. It's a really interesting conversation, and like I said, we hit the ground running, so hang on tight. Before we get to that, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new Make It Make Nonsense coming out on Sunday. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. All right, let's get to my conversation with Liz Dye. Well, Liz, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start with everybody's favorite guy, Ed Martin.
Ed Martin. Ed Martin, he's a January 6er. He's not somebody who practiced law in that way. He was never a criminal lawyer. He kicked around Missouri politics for a long time. He was chief of staff to Governor Matt Blunt, and in that position, he managed to cost the state $2 million because he did not want to comply with the Sunshine Laws. He headed up the state RNC in 2012, which was a Democratic wave year. He managed to lose basically every state party official. He wrecked the Eagle Forum and managed to get Phyllis Schlafly sued by one of her own children, which is no mean feat.
Yeah.
And then he came up here and he represented a bunch of January 6ers, not particularly ably, although it didn't matter because they all got pardoned.
Yeah.
And then Trump nominated him to be U.S. Attorney for D.C. and Congress refused to confirm him. The same Congress which confirmed RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. So
Right.
That was an impressive bar to not be confirmed by this Congress.
Yes.
Because he'd been a January 6th prosecutor. And by the way, the person that they confirmed in his stead as U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro. So not as good as Jeanine Pirro. High praise. But he was then shuffled to the Justice Department and given a bunch of titles like pardon attorney and harassing Democrats for fake mortgage fraud attorney.
Yeah.
In which capacity he did finally manage to get himself chucked out because he appears to have leaked grand jury materials with respect to the investigation into California Senator Adam Schiff. So Ed Martin's amazing. He also, in that capacity, sent a bunch of harassing letters threatening to prosecute people for woke crimes. He sent
The
to
worst
like the
crimes.
New England
Yeah.
Journal of Medicine,
Yeah.
to
Yes.
Wikipedia for, I think, poisoning Grok with woke copy or some, crazy stuff, just ridiculous stuff. He also sent an email to Dean William Traynor of Georgetown University Law Center, threatening to, get rid of Georgetown's nonprofit status because of DEI and, refusing to hire any of its graduates, which is absolutely First Amendment retaliation. Which is what Dean Traynor said in this letter,
Mhm.
which was amazing, and it was published. Okay, so that happens, and Martin manages to piss off a 1975 graduate of Gulk, Georgetown University Law Center, in living in California, and this graduate, whose name is, I think, William Argento, sends a letter or a bar complaint to the DC bar and says, this is a completely inappropriate and initiates a bar complaint. State bars are not known for their assiduousness. Let's say it's very hard to get disbarred, and basically the only way you can be sure to do it is to steal money from your client.
Right.
Which nobody says that Ed Martin did. So he was probably going to be fine, except what he did after that was so crazy. He starts spamming the DC Court of Appeals, which is functionally the state court,
Mhm.
that sits over the bar, and saying, "I need to sit down with you guys and talk about this." And they say ex parte, that is, not including all parties, communications with the judges are inappropriate. Actually, any communications with the judges with respect to this investigation would be totally
Right.
inappropriate. And they keep saying, "Stop emailing us, Ed, you freak." The "you freak" is implied. But he doesn't, and meanwhile, he doesn't answer the bar complaint. He just keeps spamming the
Right.
judges. And the judges are like, "Why?" And so, long story, sort of shorter, he winds up with an actual bar complaint about the letter to Dean Traynor and also about his absolutely inappropriate contacts, ex parte contacts with the judges, because that violates DC's rules of professional conduct. And
Right.
probably it would have gone away because the the bar is very hesitant to act on complaints from people who are not clients or parties to any case. But by his own insane response to the bar complaint, he got himself an actual investigation, which is A plus.
It in like a slate of things that are Ed Martin's career
Yeah.
in these positions. Like this to me seems to be the craziest because it's just himself shooting himself in the foot here. Like
100%.
even
It is
he
so
would know
easy.
better.
Yeah, yeah. So he's got this bar complaint. And I mean, I don't know what's gonna happen, although maybe he'll keep calling the judges and it will get, snowball. I do not know. He has done some
Right.
crazy things, and I personally am surprised because on one of his communications, his ex parte communications to the judges, he CC'd the White House counsel, David Warrington, who, unlike Ed Martin, has practiced law a lot. I have a lot of criticisms of David Warrington, but he knows that ex parte communications with judges are completely verboten. So I don't understand how the White House counsel didn't like grab hold of his sweater and pull him out of traffic before he walked into it, but such is life in Trump's DC.
Right. Just not paying attention, just not which I mean, I guess that's sort of the whole thing with the Trump DOJ is that many hands don't know what other many hands are doing, and that's
I do not know. There is no way that anybody at the White House could have thought that this was an okay thing to do. But now they've got this problem,
right.
and I guess we should talk about bar complaints as a kind of protest tool. They have
Sure.
indeed been used in the modern era, in the Trump era, as a sort of both as a way to publicly demand that Trump officials behave better. There are a lot of lawyers in Trump land doing bad stuff. And look, it hasn't in large part been particularly effective. I mean,
Hmm.
I think the only people who really got disbarred were John Eastman in California, the architect of the Stop the Steal movement, and Rudy Giuliani because he told lies about election fraud to a federal judge in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so so Pam Bondi has been freaking out and saying that these bar complaints have been weaponized, um, and thus she has to change the rules. But in fact, they really haven't, right? Like a lot of bar complaints have been filed, but as I said, the state bars are extremely reluctant to do anything about when the complainant is not a client, particularly when like it's really the only way to get disbarred, honestly, is to steal from your client. Just don't steal from your client. You will almost certainly be fine. The state bars don't do anything.
Right.
Um,
And like complaints on the scale of, mean tweets to actual discipline are like closer to mean tweets than anything else, right? I mean,
I
like,
mean, I think that they're worse. You don't have to
yeah,
respond to a mean tweet. You do have to respond in most jurisdictions
yes.
to a bar complaint, but they're not gonna deprive people of their livelihood,
Hmm.
unless you screw up in some spectacular fashion. Now, I
Right.
think it would be great if the state bars would step up, um, particularly for reasons we can talk about, because nothing is normal right now, and the Justice Department is routinely asking lawyers to do really, really inappropriate, unethical, illegal things, that we can talk about Minnesota, all of these lawyers who don't know what they're doing and who are having to do things that are not okay.
Right.
And so I think we could, and I think we should, come to a place where state bars do take a more active role. I think most people most members of the profession do believe that the state bars have fallen down by not policing our borders and ensuring professional conduct by members of the bar, and by kind of letting members of the bar use their gravitas as lawyers to support really unethical, illegal things, even by saying, well, it's just an intellectual exercise. These memos saying that you could steal the election, you could steal the electoral college, or Mike
Right.
Pence could refuse to accept electoral votes from swing states, that lawyers blessing that was really inappropriate use. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it as an intellectual exercise. It's another to present it to the world and your client, the president, as a viable option. And so
Right.
I think that there should be more sanction. I think a lot of lawyers wish that there would be more sanction, but the reality is it is not happening at scale.
It's really interesting because, I have talked with you before on this show, and with, your lovely and delightful co-host over Law and Chaos, Andrew Torrez, that I have sort of seen the state bar associations as kind of this last bastion for professional standards that
Right. Right.
lawyers see themselves and hold themselves accountable to these things. And that, like you're saying, they have turned out to be fairly toothless. So it then is weird that Pam Bondi is having this panic attack over complaints, which, yeah, they have to respond to, but they don't necessarily launch investigations. And like you
Right.
say, they don't necessarily force someone to lose their license to practice law. So it's very interesting what this is, apart from anything else than an attempt to intimidate state bar associations from the highest office in the DOJ.
Yeah. So you want to talk about what Pam Bondi did?
Let's do it.
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, Pam Bondi proposed a change to the rules in the Federal Register, the Code of Federal Regulations, which is, by the way, not the United States Code. It's not a law. It's the way that a federal agency interprets the law. And her proposal was that she should be able to Bigfoot in on state bar complaints and take them over and investigate them in-house at the Justice Department, and exclude the state bars from this investigation of Justice Department lawyers or former Justice Department lawyers with respect to conduct when they were in government employ. And it's not look, y the government can only do things, or the executive branch can only do things which Congress empowers it to do. And Congress did not empower the attorney general to take over state bar complaints. That's, the opposite of federalism. And in fact, it's funny because both Janet Reno, who was the attorney general under Bill Clinton, and Dick Thornburgh, who was attorney general under Bush, tried to kind of exempt Justice Department lawyers from ethics rules
Hmm.
imposed by state bars as a condition of practicing within the jurisdiction. And Congress passed what's called the McDade Amendment. I think that was in 2001 to say, no, that's not what we're doing. Lawyers for the Justice Department don't have to be barred in the jurisdiction where they're practicing,
Right.
but they absolutely do have to follow state ethics rules. So Pam Bondi kind of came in and said this law, the McDade Amendment, that subjected lawyers for working for the government to state ethics rules, um, and ordered the Justice Department to, implement rules to ensure compliance, was actually delegating the power to ensure compliance to the Attorney General, which that's not what the law
Right.
says, but that's her kind of, cockeyed interpretation of it. And so that was her idea. Now, this is a proposal. That doesn't mean it's gonna become a rule. I suspect it's gonna become a rule. But,
Right.
I think it's kind of a response to 2 things. One, it's these the state bar complaints against lawyers like Ed Martin and also against Lindsay Halligan, although apparently it's gonna come to nothing. The Florida bar is not super muscular,
Yeah.
much less muscular than the DC bar or the New York bar, which are more aggressive, and the California bar, which is, where John Eastman
Hmm.
got disbarred. So I think on the one hand, she's trying to protect lawyers like that, high profile lawyers who are gonna draw a lot of bar complaints, and also she's trying to protect these, line attorneys and lawyers, well, not just line attorneys, but people working in the US attorney's offices who are having to deal with the fallout from the immigration surges, which you've talked about a lot on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think I've been doing a lot of writing lately, and I'm going to be doing a lot of writing and talking about the run up to the midterms and what the DOJ is doing right now when it comes to seizing ballots and voting machines and
Mhm, mhm.
the insane audit from Arizona, which I just talked about yesterday on the
Right.
show. Uh, in that, I think that in trying to protect these line attorneys in the Department of Justice, you're also protecting another round of sort of stop the steal-esque kind of things,
Mhm,
except
mhm.
for it's a backdoor into these things. It's another way
Mhm.
around. It's the Harmy Dillons of the line attorneys kind of a
Oh,
thing.
Harmeet.
I
Yeah.
know, friend of mine and yours. Like it's that kind of a thing too that I think she's gearing up to be able to protect another version of that. It's a shield wall for these
Yeah.
people. Is that a thing you're seeing
Yeah,
too?
so let me talk about the immigration stuff because that's happening at
Mhm.
this
Right
moment,
now,
and then I
yes.
agree with you that she is trying to kind of proactively throw up a force field around the Justice Department attorneys to say, "Well, you won't face professional sanction," which, like, yes, you 100% will face professional sanction. So what and not just from the state bars, but also from the courts. So what's
Right.
happening now is that look, as I explained how the Justice Department is deliberately misinterpreting the McDade Amendment, which subjected Justice Department attorneys to state ethics rules. The Department of Homeland Security particularly is misinterpreting statutes, yanking little clauses of statutes out of context to justify the immigration dragnet that they're doing. So that they'll say it allows them to detain people who absolutely cannot be detained in circumstances that are not legal, right? So they'll
Mhm.
say, well, all of these people who had refugee status, we can still pick them up. They have to be detained while they're refugees, or we
Right.
have to pick up people who were paroled into the country, that is released to go live and work and be fine. Sometimes decades ago, they say, "Oh no, 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 we have to mandatorily detain them in these basically concentration camps to make them give up and leave." And so all of these people are filing habeas corpus petitions, that is, release me
Mhm.
petitions, and winning, but they're in courts, and this absolute deluge of habeas corpus petitions is functionally breaking district courts in places where the government is doing these dragnets, including in places like West Virginia,
Right.
where they had Operation Country Roads, which is amazing that they called it that,
Yeah.
but that they
Jesus.
pick up all of these people, and so the courts are having to deal with all of these hundreds of extra cases that have to be dealt with immediately because 'cause you've got
Right.
somebody locked up illegally,
Right.
and the courts wanna get them out, and so they're having the same, crackpot interpretation of the law that they have to rule over and over and over again, "No, you can't detain these people." And because DHS and the government and the Justice Department are so overwhelmed themselves with these petitions, they're not following rules. They're not following court orders, partly because DHS doesn't care about court
Mhm.
orders. And so they're dumping people on the street 1,000 miles from their home without their wallets and saying, "Okay, you're habeas corpus, you're released." And
Right.
so a person who lives in Minnesota is getting dumped in El Paso.
Right.
And this is making courts mad because it's wasting a lot of court resources. And there's this collision course between the judiciary and the Justice Department slash Department of Homeland Security
Yeah.
because of all of these cases. And the lawyers who are on the front lines are, making the judges mad because they're coming in with these crackpot arguments that have been rejected 100 times already. And they're saying, we promise to let these people go and keep them with their documents. And none of that is happening.
Right.
And so courts, there was a lawyer, a JAG lawyer, who was conscripted to serve in Minnesota because they're out of lawyers.
Yes.
And on top of all of this other stuff, remember, the Justice Department is not in fighting form because nobody wants to work for Pam Bondi and do this crap, right?
Right.
A lot of the experienced lawyers have vamoosed, right?
Right. Or they got fired, or they
Or
let
they
them
got
go.
fired, right?
Right.
Because so for instance, in the US Attorney's Office in Minnesota, they're at half strength,
Yes.
right? And all because and y a lot of people left because they didn't wanna do this, and then the Justice Department said, "You can't investigate the murder of Renee Good, you have to investigate her wife, her
Right.
widow, for potential obstruction of justice," and the leadership of that office was like, "The hell I
Right.
do," and quit because it's such an unethical abuse of authority. And so they're at half strength, and all of the really experienced people are gone, and they're having to, dragoon from other parts of the government, airdrop in lawyers who have never, practiced in federal court, immigration lawyers, JAG lawyers, people who are, I'm sure, very competent in their particular area of expertise, but, practice in federal court is not it, and you can't just make it up. I'm not competent to do that. No, I'm a lawyer. I couldn't come into federal court and not screw it up, and of course, they are screwing it up,
Right.
and they're getting held in contempt. They're the people that are on the front lines who are the easiest person for the judge to reach out and say, "I am going to ensure compliance by grabbing a hold of you, whichever lawyer is standing in front of me, and punishing you."
Right. Well, that's how that works. And that
Mhm.
is why, I think on partly here is why Bonnie is doing some of this, but also partly like I have been somebody on the show who's frequently been like, the law still matters for these reasons because while the president and the people at Pam Bondi's level in this government are going to continue to break the law and maybe get away with it because the Supreme Court might say that's fine, it's these people at this level who the law is still going to apply to, and no one is going to come to rescue them. And we are seeing that over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think judges are very clearly unhappy about being in this position and
Yeah.
are trying very hard to target their contempt. So in Minnesota, they're trying to target it to the political appointees. That is
Mhm.
the US Attorney Daniel Rosen, who was appointed by Trump, or to the people who are high up in the office and not the people on the ground who are, they're doing their best. But part of what Pam Bondi is worried about is that people like, Daniel Rosen, the US attorney in Minnesota, who is clearly about to be held in contempt, right? You
Yeah.
you can't continue to do the things that his office is doing when judges have said, "Stop, this is the last stop," in places like New Jersey as well. A judge in New Jersey just said, "In these habeas cases, from here on out, I am going to require immediately somebody from the Justice Department and somebody from the Department of Homeland Security to come forward and make a sworn declaration. And basically what he said is, you put your neck on the line. If this goes sideways, I'm going to hold somebody in contempt. So
Hmm.
every time one of these cases starts, I need somebody from DHS and somebody from DOJ to come up and say, yes, me. If something goes wrong, I'm responsible. And that's clearly what's going to happen, is that there are going to be these contempt findings pretty soon.
And they're going to
And that's
run out
gonna
of people
right,
fast.
and Bondi's gonna try and get out in front of it. That's why Bondi's trying to get out in front of this, to say, "Oh, no, 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 if any state bars act on all of these courts who are gonna say, 'Look, if a judge says you have behaved unethically, you have filed a frivolous complaint,' that is great evidence in a bar complaint, nothing
Yeah.
better." So, that's what she's trying to get out in front of.
Really interesting. I we mentioned Minnesota too, and I want to pivot to this thing that happened this week where a group of former military lawyers, former JAGs, have now
Mhm.
filed a suit basically to say that by conscripting these JAG attorneys to come into Minnesota, it actually violated posse comitatus. That
Yeah, so posse
yeah,
comitatus, it says basically you can't use the military for civilian law
right.
enforcement. And I think that's a really interesting argument. I haven't given it a lot of thought. But as I said, these lawyers look, the one person who's already been held in contempt was a JAG lawyer named Matthew Isahara, and a judge named Laura Provenzino. Look, I feel bad for Isahara. He'd never practiced in federal court before in his life. He walked
Right.
in, he was handed upwards of 100 habeas cases immediately. He doesn't know how to do it. I mean, he doesn't even know how to find the men's room at the courthouse, much less use the electronic filing
Right.
system. I feel very bad for him, but he screwed this case up so badly, he never even entered an appearance, right? So the government defaulted. He knows he's responsible for it. I mean, it's basically like 2.5 weeks that the action takes place. He
Mhm.
knows on day 1 that he's responsible. He just never does anything, and he keeps getting all of these notices from the court that's like, "Hey, you need to answer. Hey, you need to let this guy go. Hey, where is this guy? Hey, this guy was released without his stuff." So what happened was the judge finally, at a show cause hearing why the government shouldn't be held in contempt, said, "This poor guy was released without his wallet, and I am going to charge you, JAG lawyer, a $500 a day fine until this poor guy gets his stuff." And I think his wallet was basically overnighted to him, and the fine was never accrued.
Right.
But I mean, this guy, yes, he obviously spectacularly screwed it up, but he also was set up to fail. He does not know what he's doing. And so I don't think that that's gonna, I don't know how it's gonna redound to, it's gonna back up on him, in the posse comitatus context. I think that's such a absolutely fascinating issue, and I really look forward to, seeing how it shakes out, learning
Yeah.
more about it. But in a professional conduct way, that's Pam Bondi's trying to protect him.
Mhm.
I mean, she can't protect him from sanctions, although she can fight the sanctions. And maybe you want to talk about the difference between civil and criminal contempt.
Yeah. I mean,
Civil contempt is what judges do to force you to comply with something. So if you refuse to do something, they're going to fine you. In this case, it was $500 a day until the poor plaintiff, the petitioner, got his ID documents back. But it's kind of leverage to make you do a thing. Criminal contempt is a totally different thing. It's often called inherent contempt, that the court has the power to kind of make you,
mhm.
to punish you. It's not supposed to be really punitive, but it's a deterrent, and that the court can kind of get a lawyer and charge you if you have committed some kind of crime in respect to the court or defied a court order. It is not intended to be leverage. And the lawyers in these cases are particularly, for instance, Daniel Rosen in Minnesota, the
Mhm.
U.S. attorney for Minnesota. He's multiple judges this week have said, if this continues to go on, we are going to think about criminal contempt for your office.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not exactly sympathetic, but this is a position which the Justice Department has been put in because of the Department of Homeland Security,
Yeah.
right? Because the DHS is wilding out in the streets and breaking laws and insisting on an absolutely ridiculous interpretation of these laws and saying, "We're not going to comply with the court orders." I mean, so New Jersey, the District of New Jersey is
Mhm.
a good example. It's a very small place. I mean, no offense to New Jersey, but it's not a very big place,
Yeah.
right? All of the judges in New Jersey have said, "We're not gonna allow your interpretation of this law, which would allow you to detain immigrants indefinitely, is not how we're doing this in New Jersey." Well, if every judge in New Jersey has told you that you're doing something illegal and you continue to do it, so the
Yeah, there are
Justice Department,
consequences for that.
there are
Yes.
consequences, and look, the Justice Department has made clear that it only thinks that the law counts, basically, when a circuit court or the Supreme Court has said it. It doesn't really
Right.
care about district courts, and that's something that the Supreme Court has let them get away with, in fact, fostered,
Mhm.
and there may be consequences in a civil context, in the bar context, for making an argument before the court, which is frivolous, and
Yeah.
that is, I think, what Pam Bondi is trying to get out in front of.
I think the really interesting thing that I'm paying attention to, partly because it's a political aspect, and maybe not so much in the law or legal aspect of it, but I want to get your thoughts on this, is that what Bondi is building now, because she's been forced to, but also it's by choice of the administration, is this like terrible meat trifle of agencies between DOD and DHS and DOJ lawyers who are all mixed together in this that are not playing well together. DOJ is getting screwed over by DHS, which is, now screwing DOD, which is now sort of undermining DOJ and DHS, and all these things are working not in concert with one another. That makes for some very bad law that not just harms the people that they're targeting, but also like could harm the idea of the law in general and how this is practiced at the federal level.
Oh, 100%, right? That these agencies, and I think it makes sense to kind of start at the top. What you have is Donald Trump, and Donald Trump demands that his cabinet members run their agencies, that his cabinet members personally, um, make things happen for him, right? You know that the way to stay good with Trump, to keep sweet, is to make things happen that he wants to happen. So enact all of these immigration dragnets. Well, in the beginning, like they say, we're picking up all of these criminals. Well, you're not going to pick up criminals
Mhm.
because there aren't that many criminals. So you have to broaden the net and pick up people. Well, so think about Abrego Garcia. Kilmar
Right.
Abrego Garcia was one of the first people whose story broke through. Abrego Garcia had been released into the community. He was entitled to live here. He was entitled to work here. He was raising his family, he was in the union, he had a job, he was not a criminal,
Mhm.
he wasn't, because they like to say that these people are leeches, immigrants are leeches, or
Right.
whatever horrible slur that they wanna do. But of course he wasn't, right? He was a productive member of
Mhm.
society. But what he was on what they call the non-detained docket. That's people who have been released and told, "Well, we could deport you, but we're not going to, so just go about your business, live, whatever."
Yeah.
And that's where he was, that's where he'd been. But that is functionally a list of people that you could pick up if you were DHS, 'cause you know where they
Right.
are. They
Right.
went looking for him and they said, "Your status has changed." His status had not changed, but they
Mhm.
did it on a misinterpretation of the law. Now, his case became huge because they violated the law specifically where it said he had an order that said he could not be removed to El Salvador, and that's where they
Where they
sent
sent it.
him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But had that not happened, he would have been like all of these people who are being pulled off the street because they're on the non-detained docket and deported because the only way to survive if you're an official in Trump land is to keep giving Trump what he wants, even though what he wants isn't remotely legal,
Mhm.
right? If you need to arrest 1,000 people a day, 1,000 immigrants a day, you can't really do it legally. You have to lock these people up who are just grandmas or dads or moms out there in the community doing their jobs, paying their taxes, living, and that's going to you can't do what Trump wants legally.
Well, Liz, I always think it's going to be fascinating to watch what happens with the DOJ as it sort of burns down around Pam Bondi.
Mhm.
I don't know how long she is for the AG position, but I think we have to get through who takes over DHS next. I think Pam Bondi is going to stay there as long as Trump wants her there, but I don't know how much heat she can take before she has to get out.
Yeah, I think she's there through the midterms, which, she may regret it. She may live to regret that.
I think so too. Given everything they're setting up, I think that that's not going to be a great time for her. I think that's.
All right. Well, thank you
But
so much for having me.
thank you, Liz. It's always fun. I want to thank Liz again for being on the show. You can find Law and Chaos podcast and a link to it in the show notes. And that's it for today's episode. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. Get access to the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter, the weekly original reporting, the archives to all of these podcasts, as well as the Make It Make Nonsense newsletter for just $5 a month. If you ask me, that's a pretty good deal. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next week.